He ran one of the most feared criminal organizations in New York City. 3 black sedans, 12 armed men, and one rule nobody broke. You do not come between Do-hyun Kwon and what is his. But tonight, a nurse in compression socks just looked him dead in the eye and said, "Back up. He's my patient." And he listened. This is the story of the Red Mittens, and how a 5-year-old boy in the snow changed everything. Establish stakes fast. Keep sentences punchy. January in New York has a particular kind of silence. Not peaceful. Pressed. Eliana was already late. Double shift. Bay 7 waiting. She had exactly 0 margin left. She almost didn't see him. It was the mittens that stopped her. Red, shockingly, impossibly red against all that gray. One half buried at the frozen fountain's base. The other still on a small, unmoving hand. Her thermos hit the ground before she made a conscious decision to drop it. Korean boy. 5, maybe 6. Dark lashes pressed shut. Lips edging toward a blue she knew immediately. Not from fear, but from 12 years of nursing that had taught her exactly what that color meant. And how fast it could become something else. Okay. She wasn't talking to him. She was talking to herself, the way she always did when the world collapsed to the space between her hands and someone's survival. "I've got you. Stay with me." She called 911, monitored his airway, wrapped him in her parka, did everything training had made automatic. His fingers moved, a small curl of those red mittens against her sleeve. Like he was trying to hold on to something that wasn't disappearing. She didn't notice the black sedan that had turned slowly into the far end of the park. She didn't notice it stop. She didn't notice the 3 men in dark overcoats who stepped out like a line of organized, expensive danger. She noticed none of it until a single footstep crunched directly behind her. The man standing over her was tall in a way that looked engineered. His overcoat was worth more than her monthly rent. His face was stone, but his eyes, fixed on the boy in her arms, held something she recognized from ICU waiting rooms and trauma bays. Fear. He dropped to one knee in the snow, right there, without a word. Min-jun. His voice was almost nothing, but not quite. He looked at Eliana, and for one suspended second, it wasn't a threat. It was a question. Is he alive?
"He's alive," she said.
"And if you want him to stay that way, you'll let me work." The siren started in the distance. Neither of them looked away. The man who walks past rules show his power, then show her match it. This is your first viral moment. St. Carver's Memorial had a policy about unauthorized visitors in the pediatric ward. Posted clearly. Enforced consistently. For 11 years. Do-hyun Kwon walked past it without reading it. He arrived 4 hours after the ambulance, and he did not arrive alone. Eliana was at the nurse's station when she felt the shift in the room, the way a weather system rearranges a sky. She looked up. He was already looking at her. She set her pen down and walked around the desk. 5'6". Compression socks. She did not step back. Visiting hours are. I know what they are. His English was precise. The voice of a man who had spent years deciding which words were worth spending. "That is my son. And he is my patient," Eliana said. "Which means in this building, my authority comes first. Those men," she glanced at the 3 behind him, "stay here." Something moved in his expression. Not anger. Closer to surprise. Which told her that very few people had ever spoken to Do-hyun Kwon this way. She didn't particularly care. "You can come in. 1 person. 10 minutes. Then I'll explain his condition. Are we clear?" He studied her for a long moment, the kind of look designed to be unsettling.
"Clear," he said.
She led him to room 7. Min-jun was awake. Barely, but breathing steadily. The moment Do-hyun stepped through the door, something shifted in the boy's face. Not comfort, exactly. Something more complicated. Recognition layered over an old, quiet hurt. Do-hyun sat in the chair beside the bed and said nothing. He placed one hand on the rail, close to, but not touching, his son's arm, and simply sat there, rigid and present, like a man who had never been taught how to be soft but was trying to remember if he'd ever known. Eliana gave them the 10 minutes. When she returned, Do-hyun was still in the same position. But Min-jun's small hand had found his father's. And those stone-carved eyes were fixed on the far wall with the expression of someone doing the internal equivalent of not drowning. "He needs 48 hours minimum," she said quietly. "Then rest."
Warmth.
Full monitoring. Do-hyun nodded once. Then, without looking at her, "You saved him." It wasn't gratitude. It was something more stripped down, the acknowledgement of a debt he understood couldn't be paid with money. "I did my job," Eliana said. He looked at her then. Really looked. "Yes," he said slowly. "You did. The offer. The ordinary meets the extraordinary. Don't rush the scene." The problem became clear on the morning of discharge. Min-jun would not let go of Eliana's hand. It wasn't a tantrum. It was simply quiet, immovable fact. The boy sat on the edge of the hospital bed, fully dressed in new clothes someone had sourced overnight, and he held her hand in both of his and looked at his father with an expression that said everything his voice wasn't ready to say. Do-hyun stood in the center of the room, with the stillness of a man recalculating. "Min-jun, we're going home." The boy looked at Eliana. She crouched to his level.
"Hey."
"You're going to be okay. Your dad is." Min-jun's grip tightened.
Not frantically.
Just firmly, the way a person holds a door open against the wind. Do-hyun exhaled. He looked at the ceiling, then at his son, then at Eliana, and she saw the exact moment he made a calculation that had nothing to do with business. His son had not responded this way to anyone since his mother died 8 months ago. "What is your schedule?" Not quite a question. "Excuse me? I'm offering you a private care position."
Full-time.
"Separate quarters. My building on Park and 71st. Compensation above your current salary by a margin you will not refuse once you hear the number. 4 to 6 weeks until he is stable." "I understand you have no reason to trust me." "I'm not asking for trust. I'm asking for your professional time." "For him." She looked at the boy. Those careful dark eyes held more weight than any 5-year-old's eyes should. She looked back at Do-hyun. She should have said no. She knew that. "For weeks," she said. "My terms medically. What I say about his care goes. No exceptions." Something fractional shifted in Do-hyun's expression. "Agreed." Min-jun released a small breath and leaned against her arm like he'd been waiting for permission. "The coldest warm home. Show the penthouse," through Eliana's eyes. "Her observations are the story." The penthouse occupied the entire 43rd floor. It was, objectively, the most beautiful space Eliana had ever stood inside. And the coldest. Not in temperature, the climate system held a perfect 72 degrees. Cold in the way of rooms where no one had laughed recently. Cold in the way of furniture arranged by a designer and never rearranged by a child. No drawings on the refrigerator. No shoes in cheerful disorder by the door. Art worth more than her nursing degree, but not a single photograph. She understood immediately. The grief in this apartment was structural. It had been built into the silence. On her lunch break, she bought plants. A trailing pothose. A small jade. Basil for the kitchen windowsill because the smell of growing things was its own kind of medicine. She moved the coffee table to make floor space for Min-jun to build things. Ordered a weighted blanket. Left building blocks in a basket by the sofa. She did not ask permission. These were clinical decisions. She caught Do-hyun once, standing in the kitchen doorway at 6 a.m., looking at the basil with an expression she couldn't name. She poured him a coffee without asking how he took it. He picked it up without comment. They stood on opposite sides of the kitchen island in the pale morning light. It wasn't comfortable, exactly, but it was something. The first word. This is a payoff moment.
Slow down.
Let it breathe. Min-jun hadn't spoken since his mother's accident. 8 months of silence. Not mutism. The speech therapist's notes were careful to distinguish. Selective. A choice the boy was making because the world had given him insufficient reason to trust his voice to it. Eliana didn't push. She sat on the floor with him every afternoon and followed his lead.
Blocks.
Paper. Then, on the 4th day, small plastic dinosaurs from the corner drugstore. She lined them up. He rearranged them. She narrated what she was doing in a quiet, steady voice that asked nothing back. On the 7th day, Min-jun picked up the small blue brachiosaurus and walked it slowly toward the pothose plant on the low shelf. "He's going to eat the leaves," Eliana said very calmly. Min-jun looked at her. Then, in a voice barely larger than a breath, "He's looking for his mom." The words dropped into the room like stones into still water. Eliana didn't gasp. She didn't make a moment of it. She nodded, the way she'd nod at anything true. "I know," she said. "He misses her." Min-jun set the dinosaur down carefully beside the plant. She used to have plants. In the old house. Before, the weight of that word in a child's mouth. "I think," Eliana said, "she would have liked that one." Min-jun considered this with the gravity of someone doing important work. Then he nodded, picked up the T-Rex, handed it to Eliana. "You're this one," he said. "Because you're loud when you have to be." She laughed, really laughed, and the sound of it moved through the apartment like it was learning the space. The man in the doorway. Do-hyun falling for her through proximity. Show, don't tell. Do-hyun started appearing in doorways. A shadow at the hallway's edge during Min-jun's afternoon session, present long enough to confirm his son was laughing before withdrawing. From the kitchen doorway on Thursday, while she made oat milk cocoa. Saturday morning, watching his son arrange dinosaurs in a careful circle around the pothose. She didn't acknowledge the watching. She understood it, the way a man built entirely from control needed to observe a thing for a long time before he could let himself want it. On a Thursday evening, she left a second mug of oat milk tea on the counter beside his black coffee. No note. Just left it. She came back 20 minutes later. The mug was empty. Rinsed. Placed in the drying rack with a precision that was absolutely, unmistakably Do-hyun. She said nothing about it. The next Thursday, he was in the kitchen when she made it. He stood at the counter and watched her move through his kitchen with the expression of a man studying something he didn't have a category for yet. "You don't cook like someone who lives alone," he said. "I grew up with 4 siblings. You always cook like someone might show up." A silence. Then, did they? Show up. "Sometimes," she said. "The good ones did." He wrapped both hands around the mug and looked into it for a long moment. "My kitchen was never warm like this." Quietly. Not quite to her. More like something he was finally admitting to the room. Eliana didn't fill the silence. She'd learned by then that with Do-hyun Kwon, the silences were where the real sentences lived. 2 a.m. The fever came on a Wednesday night at 2 a.m., and it came fast. Eliana was already moving before she was fully awake. Temperature, 104.1. Breathing elevated. Eyes tracking wrong. She worked quickly. Cooling compress. For access. Vitals every 3 minutes. On the phone with the on-call pediatrician within 4 minutes. She did not call Do-hyun. Do-hyun appeared anyway. He filled the doorway in a dark shirt and no jacket, and for the first time since she'd known him, there was nothing controlled about his face. He crossed the room in 3 strides, looked at his son, and went absolutely still in the way of a man whose entire architecture of composure had just run out of material. "Tell me," he said. "Viral fever. Spiked fast. Oxygen is stable. I've got him. He's going to be okay. Tell me what to do." She looked at him, this enormous, dangerous, meticulously controlled man, standing at his son's bedside with his hands open and his face stripped bare. "Sit with him," she said. "Hold his hand. Talk to him, so he hears your voice." "I don't," he stopped. "I'm not good at this." "I know," she said. Not unkindly. "Do it anyway." He sat. He took Min-jun's small hand in both of his. And then, in a voice he clearly didn't intend for her to hear, he began to speak in Korean, slow, halting sentences she didn't need to translate. The cadence was universal. "I'm here. I'm sorry. Don't leave." Eliana worked around them both and said nothing. By 4 a.m., the fever had broken. Do-hyun was still there, his son's hand in his, forehead bowed to the bed rail, shoulders finally no longer carrying the posture of a man who managed his world from a safe distance. "Thank you," he said, without lifting his head. "You did the important part," Eliana said. He raised his head and looked at her across the bed. In the low amber light, with his son sleeping peacefully between them, something passed between them that neither of them named. But they both felt it. Away from the edge. She names what no one has dared name. This is their turning point. She found him at 11 p.m. on a Friday, standing at the floor-to-ceiling windows with a glass of scotch and the expression of a man conducting a very quiet war with himself. "You're doing it again," she said. He didn't turn around. "Doing what?" "Standing at the edge of the room instead of being in it." "I'm in the room. You're at the edge of it." She walked to stand beside him, not close, just beside, looking at the same skyline. "You do it with Min-jun too. You come to the doorway, and you watch and you leave before he can need you in a way you might not know how to answer." The muscle in his jaw moved. "I built everything in my life to ensure he would never be in danger. And he was found half dead in the snow because I was managing. Not watching. Managing." "Loving someone isn't a system you can optimize," Eliana said. "Min-jun doesn't need a man who has eliminated every variable. He needs his father to sit on the floor with him and lose at dinosaur battles and be present for the boring, ordinary Tuesdays. That's what he lost when he lost his mother. The ordinary." Do-hyun was quiet for a long time. "I don't know how to be ordinary." "I know," she said. "But you've been learning. I've been watching you learn." He looked at her steadily. "And what have you seen?" She held his gaze. A man worth the effort. The city glittered 30 floors below. Neither of them moved. But when Do-hyun finally turned from the window, he turned fully away from the edge into the room. He shows his transformation through action, not words. Keep it understated. He told her on a Sunday morning in October, 3 months after the fever, 6 months after the red mittens. Min-jun was in the kitchen making a mess of pancakes with the focused joy of a child who had discovered his father would let him crack the eggs if he asked. Do-hyun came in and set a folder in front of Eliana without speaking. She opened it. Legal documents. Transfer filings. Corporate restructuring. Dissolution orders. A systematic, methodical unwinding of a very large, very dangerous enterprise. "How long?" she asked. "Since the fever," he said. "Since I sat on the floor of his room and understood I had spent years building him a fortress, when what he needed was a home." She looked up at him. "The properties that remain are legitimate, real estate, logistics, a restaurant group. The rest is being dissolved. It will take another year. There are people who will not be pleased. There is risk in the transition. Are you safe? My team is the best in the city. And I intend to reduce the number of reasons someone might want to be my enemy." A pause. "It is not a perfect solution." "It's a real one," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. "I need you to understand what I'm choosing. I'm not asking you to choose it with me, but I needed you to see it." "Why?" "Because you're the reason I understood what I was building it for." From the kitchen, Min-jun announced triumphantly that he had not dropped a single egg. Do-hyun's face did what it did rarely and beautifully. It softened. He looked toward the kitchen, where his son held up an intact egg with the pride of someone who had just climbed a mountain. "Go help him," Eliana said softly. He went. She sat with the folder and her coffee and listened to the sound of Do-hyun Kwon learning how to be in a room without standing at its edge. This, she thought. This is what recovery looks like. Not one dramatic moment. 1,000 small surrenders to the ordinary. Earned emotion. Don't over-narrate. Let the details carry the weight. The wedding was in October. Small, Do-hyun had wanted that. Real, Eliana had insisted on that. 40 people. A restored brownstone in the West Village that smelled like wood smoke and late-season flowers. Do-hyun's aunt flew in from Seoul. She spent the first hour examining Eliana with the scrutiny of a woman who loved her nephew fiercely. Then she pulled her aside before the ceremony. "He smiles now," she said in careful English. "He didn't before you." Then she nodded once, as if this settled everything, and returned to her seat. Min-jun was the ring bearer. He wore a small suit with a red pocket square that matched his winter mittens, Eliana's idea, which she hadn't explained to Do-hyun until that morning when he looked at his son and understood it completely without a word. Min-jun stood between them at the altar during the vows with the gravity of a 7-year-old who knew he was witnessing something important. When the officiant finished, he looked up at Eliana and said, quietly, clearly, with the full confidence of a boy who had learned his voice was worth using. "Does this mean you're staying?" Eliana crouched down to his level, in her dress, in front of 40 people and the city skyline. "I'm staying," she said. He nodded. Then he took both of their hands, one of hers, one of his father's, and held them together with the satisfied certainty of someone who had engineered this outcome and was very pleased to see it through. Later, guests gone, candles burned low, Min-jun asleep on the couch under his weighted blanket with a dinosaur tucked under his arm. Eliana stood in the kitchen and Do-hyun stood beside her. They washed dishes together in the amber light without speaking. The basil was still on the windowsill. The pot hose had grown long enough to trail across 2 shelves. The kitchen smelled like the dinner they'd made together and the warmth of a room that had been lived in. "You said," Do-hyun said quietly, handing her a glass to dry, "that the good ones show up." She looked at him. "I'm here," he said. Simply. Fully. Not from a doorway. Eliana took the glass. Smiled. "Yeah," she said. "You are." Outside, October settled gold over the city. Inside, the kitchen was warm on both sides. Emotional resonance drives shares more than commands. A nurse in compression socks who never stopped believing people were worth saving. A boy with red mittens who just needed someone to sit on the floor with him. And a man who finally walked away from the doorway and into the room. If this story found you tonight, if some part of it reached you somewhere real, don't scroll past it. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded that people can change. That ordinary things are worth choosing. That showing up is enough. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications because there are more stories coming and you do not want to miss what's next. Drop your city in the comments. We read every single one. We'll see you in the next one.